Welcome to Marketplace Tech Bytes. It's our weekly roundup of the biggest goings-on in the tech world. I'm Meghan McCarty, Carino. This week, Intel gets over $7 billion in federal subsidies for chips manufacturing. ChatGPT turns 2 years old. What's next for its maker, OpenAI? And has AI progress hit a wall? Here to discuss all that is our regular contributor, Natasha Mascarenhas from The Information. Hey, Natasha.
Hey, Megan, how's it going?
It's going great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm eagerly waiting for my mac and cheese serving. So Don't mind me if I'll hop out after this podcast.
All right. Well, before that, we're going to start, as we always do, with our bite of the week. This is a number that gives us some insight into the week in tech. Natasha, what number do we need to know this week?
The number this week is 300, and that represents 300 million weekly users, otherwise known as how many users that ChatGPT has landed just 2 years after launching.
Okay, well, we are going to get into all things ChatGPT in just a minute. But first, we want to start with some chips news. The U.S. Commerce Department announced this week that it's finalizing a $7.86 billion subsidy for Intel. It's actually down a bit from the originally promised amount, but it is the largest award yet under the Chips and Science Act to, spur domestic semiconductor production. Natasha, how big of a deal is this for Intel right now?
It's a massive deal for Intel. And if I was Intel right now, I would be very happy that it is all finalized before the new administration comes in. Intel has had its own share of struggles, including just the fact that its chips business is losing money for years. Its stock price is down about 51% year to date. And so I think seeing them get the largest, I believe, government subsidy for a domestic chip maker is great news. And while it's a little less than what was originally promised, it also comes after the chip company won around $3 billion from the Pentagon. So a lot of money going towards Intel and at good timing nonetheless.
Well, as you noted, there's kind of the business side of this, and then there is the political side. There's some uncertainty about whether the Chips and Science Act is going to survive come January. Does it seem like the Biden administration is kind of trying to rush as much money out the door as possible before then?
Yeah, this is exactly what we expect in the last few weeks of a presidency. So I expect us to see a lot more from the Biden administration in response to all of the things that Trump has said that he may want to shift, take away, or at least dramatically change. I mean, Trump has definitely spoken a lot about the CHIPS Act and not being a massive supporter on it. And just to catch people up, the CHIPS Act is basically legislation that provides incentives for chip makers to set up manufacturing in the U.S. instead of abroad. And so it's been a point of contention for a while. It came up during the election cycle. I think Trump and at least some of the Republican Party has walked back some of the immediate, we're going to end the CHIPS Act discourse. But, what we do know is we don't know what's going to happen come January.
Right. Some known unknowns always there. But now let's get into that birthday of sorts for the world's favorite chatbot, ChatGPT. It turns 2 on November 30th. I would say its first year of existence kind of seemed to be all about just wrapping our collective minds around, this new reality of super powerful large language models. What would you say has defined this second year of ChatGPT?
Yeah. So, when I was sent some topics for this show, I actually was like, let me just ask ChatGPT what it thinks about year 2. And I enjoyed, they had kind of 6 different traits. I picked 2 of them, and I have my own third that was
gotta have a lot of bullet points when
exactly
ChatGPT a question. So
exactly. So 2 of the ones that I really agree with them for, right, is fine-tuning and improvements. We saw so many launches of new GPTs, new products, and even this fall we saw OpenAI spark a research race that the information has covered a ton over reasoning AI. So it just kind of, and it triggered the Googles of the world to sort of respond as well. That's one. The second big theme I thought was ethics and responsibility. I'll add on scrutiny there. I mean, there was several
Mm,
departures this year, right? Like
right.
there was Ilya Sutskever, there was
Mhm.
Don Lakey, a safety leader at ChatGPT, the Mira Murati, who had briefly taken over from Sam Altman when he was fired briefly for the board. And so I think we saw a lot of OpenAI have to reckon with its position in the market and respond to that. And then I'll end with just commercialization.
Mm,
We just published an interview from OpenAI sales chief, sort of talking about how it's really seeing a lot of adoption in corporate AI spending. But let's just remember that OpenAI is targeting 4 billion in revenue this year. So if anything, year two is talking about billions as well.
Well, OpenAI still seems to be kind of riding the wave of enthusiasm for ChatGPT. We got news this week that it just got another $1.5 billion of investment, this time from SoftBank. Where is OpenAI kind of going next? How are they hoping to grow?
Definitely. I mean, kind of going back to what I was mentioning, OpenAI is projecting nearly 4 billion in revenue this year, and it's hoping to have as much as 100 billion in revenue by 2029. It means that in order for the company to really get there, they need to find a way to capitalize on selling to not just individuals who are excited about ChatGPT, but really enterprises. And so working with healthcare, working with manufacturing, working with legal companies is extremely important to it. As for its place in like being one of the highest valued private tech companies of today, the news that we're seeing that they have another 1.5 billion coming in, I think says something really big about what companies of this size prioritize these days. That 1.5 billion, just to nerd out for a second, is it's the amount that employees are able to share to SoftBank. And so it shows that employees are going to be able to cash out somewhat on a regular basis for OpenAI if they stay there, which is, gives them more and more time to stay private and not need to go public. And I think that tells you a little bit too about where the company sees itself. It sees itself as a big company, but not one that maybe is necessarily rushing to the public markets. So I think we'll see it focus on growth and focus inward for a while too.
One direction that came up in some reporting at The Information that I wanted to talk about was the idea that OpenAI is potentially developing its own web browser to compete with Google Chrome. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, totally. So that was a really great story by my colleagues. OpenAI has spoken about creating a search-like product with the Condé Nast, Redfins, Eventbrites, and Pricelines of the world. It makes a ton of sense when you think about it because right now the experience is you kind of go to chatgpt.com and kind of interact it with that and can do it on your phone as well. But making a web browser gives OpenAI a really natural and massive way to take control of a user's experience. And so it would boost ChatGPT, but it would also, give them an ability to sort of combine more functionality with its search bot, with its chat bot, which is good news. And I guess I don't know. I'm fascinated to see where it goes next because it's really going to create even more competition with Google and
Right.
Google is definitely, on its trail on the research side. So we see them kind of really going head to head, which, 2 years ago, we would never put them in the same sentence as competitors. So it's interesting to see where things end up in 2024.
All right, so now we want to talk about a topic that's kind of been murmured about in the background for, the last month or so, and that's this idea that AI may be hitting a wall. There's been a bunch of reporting kind of including at The Information suggesting that the law of scalability, this assumption that if you just keep adding more data, make the large language model larger, that it will continue to make exponential improvements, that may not be delivering the advances hoped for. Of course, a number of big names, Sam Altman, Dario Amodei, have kind of publicly poo-pooed this idea, but there has been reporting behind the scenes that there's not enough data now, basically, that the entirety of the internet has been exhausted, or perhaps just that the improvements, that are being seen are more incremental than exponential. What's your sense of kind of how people in the industry are talking about this?
I think you put it perfectly. The reason so many people are so emotional about the topic of are we hitting a wall in AI is that it tests this really core assumption that stories and business models are built on top of, right? The
Mm.
idea that LLMs could improve as long as they have access to infinite data and infinite computing power. And it's not that we don't have enough data, and it's not that we, you know, it's not that the computing power has even reached its limits. It's
Mhm.
more like, is that enough? And
Mhm.
so that creates a really unique question. And so, I mean, Google and OpenAI are figuring this out right now. Researchers from conversations that my colleagues are having with them, believed that this would be enough for a long time, but now we're seeing them sort of shift their strategy. And so it'll be more like they improve their models after they initially trained it and creating a new type of scaling law. It just means that there's a lot more questions, to put into it. And I think it like gives them a little bit of a pressure and a sort of like, now where do we put our attention
Yeah.
if we're going to be, maybe it doesn't look like we're going to put billions and billions of dollars developing expensive data centers and LLMs if performance gains are not what we expected.
I'm curious if this conversation is affecting the startup space at all, which you report on. For the last couple of years, all the oxygen has been going to this kind of very specific brand of AI, generative models, large language models. This is going to lead to super intelligence. This is the route to stay on. I mean, does this maybe open up the playing field to other modalities a little bit more?
I definitely think so, and I've already started to see it over the past few weeks. So I'm glad you asked. But we've talked so much about large language models on this show and over the year. I'm starting to hear much more about small language models.
Yeah.
These are like lighter, faster, resource light models that can be used on edge devices. Like someone
Right.
was like, you can use AI on your washing machine on
Hmm.
button or smartphones, and it doesn't require the same amount of like cloud infrastructure.
Yeah.
But it's kind of interesting because you see it go from like, do we need to, can OpenAI give us these gains, but can we just take what matters and
Mhm.
then make it easier for a company that doesn't need to like, have the world to use it on a day-to-day basis. So I'm seeing a lot more from small language model
Mm.
companies, and I could totally see VCs starting to put more money there as well.
All right, that's Natasha Mascarenhas with the information. Always so good to have you.
Always so good to be here. Can't wait to be back next time.
And thanks to all of you for watching Marketplace Tech Bytes Week in Review. Daniel Shin produced this episode. I'm Meghan McCarty Carino. This is APM.